Hey, welcome to this lecture. Now, our main aim is to understand how can you construct histograms using ggplot function. So in this case, we want to see how can you also specify bins, modify the color, the transparency by making use of alpha argument, fill, and as well as how can we map aesthetics to variables. Okay, so our data set in this case, I'm going to create this data set. Say we are looking at website visit. So I'm going to say web, all right? So I'm going to read .csv. So the name of this data is web underscore visit, right? So the data set is attached. So you can also go ahead and try to read these data sets. Okay, so I'm going to sum and say web, right? So this is quite a huge data set. Okay, so as you can see here, we have referrer, the referrer website, the device used to visit the website, whether you visited and exited, and we have number of visits. So we want to draw our attention to this column, which is the number of visits. Okay, so let's see how can we create a histogram. Okay, so remember we have to say ggplot, and then we say data, then we have to pass in web. Okay, and then we have to add in this layer to specify we're creating a histogram, right? And then in this case, we want to focus on number of visits. And if you run this, and okay, so what you are seeing is that R is also giving us certain warning or certain guidance that we can also use, right? But in this case, so this here is a simple example of how can we create a histogram, right? So now we want to specify bins, right? So the default number of bins is 30, right? So we can modify this number of bins by making use of bins argument. Okay, so we come here, right? Remember, we have to be outside of that aesthetic function. Okay, so we come and say bins, we specify 7, for example. So this has created a histogram with 7 bins, right? The default is 30, but in this case we specify bins equal to 7 just to specify that we want to create a histogram with 7 bins, right? Now we know how to create a histogram, right? How can we modify the appearance, right? So how can we modify the color as well as the border color, right? So in that case, you come in here, remember it has to be outside the aesthetic function, and you come in here and say, when you say fill, we want blue, right? So what you're seeing here is that we have been able to modify the background color of this histogram. We use the fill argument, right? So in this case, we have changed the color to blue, right? We can also change the transparency of the background color. As you've guessed, we're going to use alpha argument and say, for example, we have 0.3. As you observe here, that's the transparency in the background color has changed based on this value, right? So if we increase this to 0.5, you can see it become more and more clear. So the transparency keeps on decreasing, right? So if 0.9, it becomes more blue, right? We can also change the color, right, of the histogram, right, by modifying the color argument. So how can you do that? We can come in here. I'm going to remove, say, Control L. I'm going to try and move this to the side, and then I'm going to come in here and say we want the color to be blue, and then we want to specify the histogram border color, right? And let's say in this case we want to make it red. Let's see. Okay, so let's say we simply just fill this with white so that it becomes clear, and then we specify the border color to be red. That's not bad. We can also specify this simply just to be blue. That's even much better. So this here is an example of how you can also modify the histogram border color. You modify the color argument, right? If you want to specify the background color, you have to specify fill, right? So in this case, you specified fill to be white. So what it does is that it changed the color here in the bins. It becomes white, but the border, the histogram border color was changed by modifying the color argument. Okay, so that is how you can try and change the colors, right? So what about the width, right? Remember is that in most cases, we want to also control the number of pins, right? So we want to use the bin width argument, right? So let's say here, we say bin width, instead of bins, we come here and say bin width, right? And let's say we specify 2, and we'll try to run this. So you observe now that the width of our bins has changed, right? So in this case, we have specified the width of the bins instead of the number of bins, right? So we have done that by modifying the bin width argument. Okay, so we can use either, but in this case we decided to use the bin width in order to control the number of bins. Okay,